In 1978, in a hotel ballroom in London, a panel of the most respected wine experts in the world sat down to a blind tasting. 33 wines, some of the greatest Bordeaux on earth, first growth, legends, and one wine nobody had really heard of, submitted from somewhere on the Italian coast. When the bottles were unwrapped, the wine that had beaten them all was Italian, and legally classified as a table wine. Under Italian law, in 1978, this bottle was officially the lowest grade of wine the country produced. Basically, it was the same legal status as a €2 carton from a petrol station. Why? Because the men who made it had broken the rules, deliberately, and it took the Italian wine establishment another 15 years to admit they were the ones who'd been wrong. This is the story of the Super Tuscans, the wines that beat Italian wine law into submission, featuring a Marquis with a stable full of racehorses, a famously stubborn Florentine family, an enologist obsessed with Bordeaux, and a swampy patch of coast nobody took seriously until they had to. To understand the rebellion, you have to understand what they were rebelling against. In the 1960s, Italy created its first formal wine quality system, DOC, Denominazione di Origine Controllata, copying the French AOC. Every region got a rulebook. Chianti, the famous Tuscan red, got a particularly stupid one. Under the original Chianti DOC, to legally call your wine Chianti, you had to do 3 things. 1. Use mostly Sangiovese, the local red grape. Fine. 2. You were not allowed to make 100% Sangiovese wine, you had to blend in other varieties. And 3, and this is the one that drove serious winemakers mad, you had to include a mandatory percentage of white grapes in your red wines. White grapes in red wine. The reason was political. Tuscany had a lot of farmers growing not very good white grapes, and the law was written to give those farmers a guaranteed buyers. So every bottle of Chianti was, by law, slightly watered down by grapes that didn't belong there. The result, by the 1970s, was the reputation of Chianti had collapsed. The wine had become a punchline. A cheap, thin red in a straw basket on every red-checked tablecloth in every Italian-American restaurant. A handful of ambitious producers looked at this and made a quiet and dangerous decision. They were going to ignore it. They were going to make the best wine they possibly could, even if it meant their bottles would be legally branded the lowest grade Italy could give them. Vino da tavola, table wine. The first to pull the trigger was a Marquis with racehorses. His name was Mario Incisa della Rocchetta, an Italian aristocrat, Piemontese by birth, and by the 1940s he had 2 great loves in life: racehorses and Bordeaux wines. The racehorses he was famous for. His Italian reboat is still considered one of the greatest racehorses in history. 2 undefeated seasons. People in Europe knew Mario as a horseman, not a wine man, and that matters in a minute. His estate was a place called Tenuta San Guido, in a tiny coastal village called Bolgheri. In the 1940s, Bolgheri was nowhere. Swampy, coastal, the Tuscany wine establishment dismissed it. As Mario himself once wrote, Bolgheri wine was always bad, if not turned to vinegar. But Mario had a fixation. As a student in the 1920s, he had tasted a Cabernet wine from a Tuscan estate near Pisa, and the memory haunted him. Later, he tasted a 1924 Chateau Margaux and recognized the same character. He became convinced that the gravelly soils of Bolgheri, full of small stones, resembled the great gravel beds of Bordeaux's Médoc and Graves. So in the mid-1940s, just after the war, he did something nobody in Tuscany was doing. He planted Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc, French grapes, on a stony patch of his land. He named the vineyard Sassicaia, which means simply place of many stones. And then for almost 20 years, he made the wine only for his family, just for private consumption at the estate. Nobody outside really tasted it. Nobody outside really cared. He was, after all, just a racehorse guy. And in the late 1960s, his nephew, a young Florentine named Piero Antinori, finally tasted it. Piero, who came from one of the most famous wine families in Italy, was stunned. He told his uncle the wine was extraordinary. It had to be released. So in 1968, Mario bottled his first commercial vintage of Sassicaia. It hit the market in 1971, and because the wine was made from non-Italian grapes in a place with no DOC, the bottle was officially labeled Vino da Tavola, table wine. The law was great. The most aristocratic wine in Tuscany, made by a Marquis in a Bordeaux style on his ancestral estate, was legally the same category as the cheapest plonk in Italy. That was the first shot of the rebellion, and the second came almost immediately. Piero Antinori went home from his uncle's estate with a problem. The Antinori family had been making wine in Florence since the 13th centuries, 26th generation. They owned vineyards in the absolute heart of Chianti Classico. And Piero was tired of seeing the Chianti name embarrassed by bad rules and bad wines. He decided to do something quietly outrageous. In 1971, on the Antinori estate of Tignanello, in the middle of Chianti Classico, Piero made a red wine that broke essentially every rule of the local DOC with his enologist Giacomo Taccis, a man with his own obsession with Bordeaux winemaking. So he did three things at once. One, he made the wine from about 80% Sangiovese and 20% Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. Cabernet was illegal in Chianti. Two, he refused to include any white grapes in the blend. And three, he aged it in small 225 liters French oak barrels, exactly like Bordeaux. Tuscan tradition called for huge old neutral casks, but Taccis wanted French oak. And the wine was magnificent. It was also legally a table wine, Vino da Tavola, demoted to the same legal status as Sassicaia in the very heart of one of Italy's most famous appellations. Then Piero did one more revolutionary thing. The legendary Italian critic Luigi Veronelli urged him not to fight the classification, just to name the wine something distinctive that would stand on its own merit. So Antinori didn't put Chianti or any official designation on the label. He just named it after the vineyard. Tignanello. That was the second revolution. A name in a place of classification. A brand instead of a bureaucratic stamp. The wine would have to sell itself purely on quality and not on reputation. No appellation to hide behind, no rules to obey. And it worked. Tignanello became, almost overnight, one of the most talked about wines in Italy. And now, there were two of them, Sassicaia on the coast and Tignanello in Chianti. Both officially table wine and both quietly destroying the reputation of properly classified wines twice their price. The Italian wine establishment was confused. The international wine was about to be set on fire. In London, 1978, Decanter magazine organized a blind tasting of Cabernet-based wines from around the world. 33 bottles, the lineup included top Bordeaux, included First Growth, alongside ambitious Cabernets from California, from Australia, and from basically anywhere serious about Cabernet. And slipped almost as a curiosity into the lineup, the 1972 vintage of Sassicaia, the table wine from Bolgheri. When the panel revealed the results, Sassicaia had won. He had beaten the most prestigious wines in the world from a place nobody had heard of. It was labeled in Italy as the same category as supermarket plonk. The wine press couldn't get enough of this. The story was perfect, a Cinderella from the Tuscan coast, out-drinking Chateau Lafite. And then a few years later, a young, ferociously influential American critic named Robert Parker got hold of Sassicaia. In 1988, he tasted the 1985 vintage and gave it 100 points, the very first perfect score he had ever awarded to an Italian wine. Of his 37-year career, he said at the time it was one of the most impressive wines he had ever tasted. That was the moment Italy's table wine rebellion broke through to the global wine market. The Marquis had built one of the most valuable wine names on earth. You may have noticed I haven't actually said the words Super Tuscan yet. That's because for the first decade of the rebellion, the term didn't exist. It was coined by English-speaking wine writers in the 1980s, scrambling for a way to describe these spectacular wines that didn't fit any official Italian category. Various people have been credited with the phrase Super Tuscans, the Italian critic Luigi Veronelli, the American journalist Burton Anderson, the British master of wine David Gleave. Honestly, nobody is entirely sure. What everyone agrees on is that the term was a marketing accident. It stuck because the alternative, calling this wine table wine, was absurd. Super Tuscan is not a legal category of Italian wine. It never has been. It is just a nickname invented by foreign journalists. It means, more or less, a high-quality Tuscan red wine that doesn't fit into the official Italian rulebook. That's it. What happened next is the part of the story that's still happening today. With Sassicaia proving Bolgheri could grow world-class Bordeaux varieties, the gold rush began. In 1981, Piero Antinori's younger brother, Lodovico Antinori, planted vines on the property right next to Tenuta San Guido. He called the estate Ornellaia. First commercial vintage, 1985, a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot, essentially a Bordeaux blend made in Italy. Within Ornellaia, there was a small plot of strange blue clay soil that was completely different from the surrounding gravel. Lodovico planted it with Merlot, inspired by the great Merlots of Pomerol. In 1987, that single plot became its own wine, Masseto. Today, Masseto, at 6.5 hectares of blue clay, is one of the most expensive Merlots on the planet, brutally selling for over €1,000 a bottle. And then, back inland on the Antinori estate near Florence, Piero did it again. 1978, he released Solaia, a wine that was essentially a reverse Tignanello, about 75% Cabernet Sauvignon with Sangiovese as the supporting grape, so Cabernet, not Sangiovese as the star, made in the heart of Chianti Classico. The 1997 Solaia would later be named Wine of the Year by Wine Spectator, the first Italian wine to ever win this honor. In the space of about a decade, this rebellion had produced 5 of the most coveted wines in Italy: Sassicaia, Tignanello, Solaia, Ornellaia and Masseto. All of them, on paper, table wine, but all of them, in practice, going for prices that humiliated the legally classified wines around them. By the mid-1980s, dozens, eventually hundreds of other Tuscan producers were piling in. Some made magnificent wines, some made cynical knockoff. The Bolgheri coast, a swampy backwater in 1944, was now seriously being called the Italian Bordeaux. And the Italian wine authorities finally had to do something about this embarrassment. In 1992, Italy finally did something and created an entirely new wine classification specifically to give the Super Tuscans somewhere respectable to live. It was called IGT, Indicazione Geografica Tipica, and it sat between Vino da Tavola at the bottom and DOC/DOCG at the top. From that point on, the Super Tuscans were no longer table wine. They were IGT Tuscana. Then, in 1994, the Bolgheri DOC itself was rewritten to actually allow red wines made from Cabernet, Merlot and the other Bordeaux varieties the rebels had been planting. The rulebook finally caught up with the wines. And the Chianti rules? They were quietly fixed too. The mandatory white requirement was phased out, 100% Sangiovese Chianti banned in 1970 was finally permitted in 1996. Cabernet banned outright was allowed in blends. Every single thing the rebels had fought for was eventually codified in Italian law. And then, in 2013, Italy did something it had never done for any wine before. It created an entire DOC just for Sassicaia. Bolgheri Sassicaia DOC, a single estate appellation, the only one of its kind in Italian wine law. A wine that had spent its first quarter century legally classified as bottom rung was now its own protected category, a category nobody else on earth is allowed to use. The Marquis della Rocchetta, who died in 1983, never saw any of it, but he had won completely. Here is some rules to get you started with Super Tuscan bottle and to help you read their wine label. 1. Look for a made-up name. Super Tuscans almost never use the appellation as a headline. The big name on the label is a proprietary name. Sassicaia, Tignanello, Ornellaia, Solaia, Masseto, Guado al Tasso, Le Pergole Torte. If a Tuscan red has a single distinctive proper name rather than a place name, you're probably holding one. 2. Check the classification. Look in small print for IGT Tuscana. That's the modern Super Tuscan home. Or Bolgheri DOC for the coastal Bordeaux style wines. Or, in exactly one case, Bolgheri Sassicaia DOC. 3. Research the producer. Because the category has no official rules, the producer's reputation is everything. A great IGT Tuscana from a serious estate is one of the world's great wine. A cynical IGT Tuscana from someone riding the marketing wave is overpriced juice. Here are some names that are worth to learn. Antinori, Tenuta San Guido, Ornellaia, Frescobaldi, Tuarita, La Macchiole, Gajas Tuscan Estate, and Montevertine. Quick break, but if you're learning something in this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, to like the video and to share it. And if you want to deepen your wine knowledge, you can go to our academy. We have different courses about wine. There is, for example, Wine 101, when I give you all the basis to really enjoy wine, from how it's made to how to taste it, and we have plenty of other courses that will come on this platform. And if you like the map that is right behind me, we also sell it and ship it worldwide. I put all the link in description, and I hope to see this map at your place or at your friend's place very soon. Let's get back to our Italian wines. One last honest question. Is the term Super Tuscan still useful today? There is a real argument that it isn't. The original rebellion is basically over. The rulebook that made these wines outlaws was rewritten 30 years ago. Sassicaia has its own DOC. Many of the legendary names now sit comfortably inside official appellations. Some serious sommeliers refuse to use the term. They say Toscana IGT or just call the wine by the name. But the story behind the name is still doing real work. When you order a Super Tuscan, you're not just ordering a bottle, you're ordering a piece of wine history. A reminder that the rules of wine are made by people, and people can be wrong. And sometimes the best response to a bad rule is to quietly ignore it and make something so extraordinary that the rule book has to come to you. That's why the name has survived. Not because it's a useful technical category, it isn't, but because the rebellion underneath is one of the great wine stories of the 20th century.